You're listening to Crosstalk, Conversations with Kurtis. Crosstalk, Conversations with Kurtis is brought to you by...
You know, there are few relationships more solid than the bond between a man and his barber. For years, I've gotten my cut with Gene the Barber. Gene has been cutting my hair for more than 20 years. Call him directly at 240-687-7253 and make an appointment. Gene the Barber, 240-687-7253.
A Squared Home and Office Solutions is the go-to source for home or office network and audiovisual solutions. We can help with smart home integration, wireless networking, media rooms, security systems, and more. We will link technology to your lifestyle seamlessly. Visit homeandofficesolutions.com for more info.
You're listening to Crosstalk, Conversations with Kurtis. Here's your host, Kurtis Cross.
Welcome to Crosstalk, Conversations with Kurtis. I am your host, Kurtis Cross. Thank you for joining the conversation today as I welcome you to the table. Be sure to connect with the conversation on Instagram and Twitter at Kurtis Talks. And of course, you can visit kurtistalks.com to join the conversation online. Thanks to our sponsors, Gene the Barber and A Squared Home and Office Solutions. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm always excited to invite you to the table for another episode, and today is absolutely one of those days. Joining me today is a gentleman, a true scholar, and I'm proud to say a friend. When I mentioned to a colleague that Jeremi Duru would join the conversation today, that colleague told me, and I quote, "In all sincerity, I am super impressed by what he's done and what he's doing. There's a lot of Ivy League lawyers about whom I would not say the same." So let's start the conversation. Joining me today is Professor Jeremi Duru. Jeremi currently is a professor of law at American University's College of Law. You can credit Jeremi with teaching sports law, civil procedure, and employment discrimination. Among his writing credits, Professor Duru is the co-author of Sports Law and Regulation and the Business of Sports Agents. As the sole author of Advancing the Ball, he examines the NFL's movement towards increased equality and opportunity for coaches and front office personnel in the NFL. His work with the United States Anti-Doping Agency Review Board and his variety of work with NCAA committees should also be noted. Jeremi, I could keep going, but I'll end with this. You earned your BA from Brown University, your master's in public policy was earned at Harvard, and your Juris Doctorate is also from Howard University. You are, of course, a Montgomery Blazer alum. Jeremi, how are you doing today, fella?
Hey, Kurtis, I'm great. Real pleasure to be back talking with you and to be on this show.
Well, thanks for being here. I thank you for joining the conversation. I'm proud to call you a friend, but I appreciate your time to add to this conversation. I know we have a window of time today, so let's jump right into it. Your research and work in the area of minority candidates being hired in the NFL is an effort that you've long been involved with. If I'm not mistaken, and I looked it up, I ordered your book on Amazon nearly 10 years ago. Please tell me where we are now since those efforts began.
Sure. So sadly, we're not as far ahead as I think we should be. Right. The NFL and other professional sports leagues and the NCAA as well, they move in fits and starts. And I think there are periods of great progress and then periods of backsliding. With the NFL in particular, beginning in 2002, 2003, when there was just a tremendous deficit of coaches of color and general managers of color in the league, we're really at a low point. Things kind of shot out from there, really improved over the course of the next 5, 6, 7 years, plateaued for a while. Then as of 2017, we've seen a real backslide. So a lot of the conversation now is trying to figure out how we get things moving in the right direction again.
All right. And I can't help but think, and someone brought this to my attention, and maybe I'm going down the wrong path. I don't know. But, we see Houston hires a coach of color who inherits a really tough situation down there. Yeah. And then we see Urban Meyer, who inherits a situation where you have a number one pick and plenty of cap space. And I'm wondering, are the cards stacked against, certain coaches when they do get that opportunity? Is it in the most enviable of positions?
Yeah, so historically, Curtis, in the run of cases, candidates of color tend to get the less desirable jobs.
Right.
It's not just this off season; it's most off seasons. Okay. It's unfortunate. The double standards are substantial. There was a report that I wrote about in the book that was put out back in 2002 that explored Black coaches versus white coaches in the league over the previous 15 years. So going back from 2002 back into the 80s. And in the first year as head coach with the club, Black coaches won 2.7 more NFL games than white coaches. Now we're talking about a 16-game season.
Right.
It's a lot of games. In the year in which coaches were terminated, Black coaches won 1.5 more games, and overall Black coaches won more games and on average went to the playoffs more often. Notwithstanding that, their tenures were shorter. Okay, so the double standard that you reference now that certainly exists has existed for a long time. It's one of those really unfortunate and often unspoken dynamics in sport, and we're certainly seeing it this hiring cycle. And you mentioned the Jacksonville situation. I don't think we can let that pass without talking about the I guess 1-day tenure of the strength coach there, who got run out of Iowa for the way that he treated all of his players, but in particular the allegations from African American players. So for him to have even been hired by an NFL club was a real problem.
Yeah, no, it was. And you look at Romeo Crennel. Has he ever gotten a fair shake? You look at Todd Bowles, whose defense won a Super Bowl this past year, but he was offered the New York Jets job at one point when that was an undesirable job. Romeo was in Cleveland. Romeo took over, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, a tough situation in Houston once their coach was fired. Disgruntled Deshaun Watson, a TJ Watt who doesn't want to be there. And now this gentleman, please help me. I can't say his name right now, who's in Houston now.
David Culley.
David Culley, thank you. And then, I see a presser from Philly's coach who sounds like he has not a clue what's going on in Philadelphia. Have you seen that presser?
Yeah, I saw that, Curtis, and certainly it was not an impressive press conference. And then just, not long before that, you had the new head coach in Detroit talking about biting, his players to be biting people's kneecaps on the way up and on the way down.
Right.
And I think it's hard to imagine an African-American coach giving either of those press conferences,
right,
and not being totally skewered. I think any African-American coach who would give a press conference like either of those wouldn't have been hired in the first place.
Right. I think you're correct. And it seems as though the NFL certainly is sort of equitable in their firings. But when we look at the coaching vacancies and the hirings, I don't think we moved the needle at all in this offseason. Maybe by one coach, maybe, but particularly the vacancies in 2021, the NFL did not, to use your term, advance the ball from the 2020 season into this upcoming season. Well over 50% of the players are Black. 1/3 of the assistant coaches are Black, yet just 3 or 4 NFL coaches are Black, and I believe just 5 minority coaches in general. While expansion of the Rooney Rule was implemented, we did not see much change. Jeremy, help me understand that. Is there the elephant in the room? Talk to me. What am I missing?
Yeah, sure. So I think, I will say this. I think the NFL really dropped the ball on this issue back in 2017. The Raiders made a hire that pretty much ignored the Rooney Rule altogether, and the NFL didn't punish the Raiders. And I think from that point, there's been a sense around the league that maybe the league doesn't care about these equal opportunity initiatives that much. Mm-hmm. But over the last year, the league itself, the NFL, has improved. I'm talking about Park Avenue now. The front office of the NFL has improved. They've expanded the Rooney Rule. They've brought into play other equal opportunity initiatives. And there's great commitment, in my view. I've sat in some of those meetings. I do believe there's commitment at the NFL headquarters on this issue. I think now it falls to the individual club owners.
Okay.
I think it falls to the individual club owners. The NFL does not have the right to hire a coach or to fire a coach. It's the clubs. And I think the NFL has given the clubs the raw materials to do better. Some clubs are doing well, but I think some clubs just aren't committed to an intentional and deliberate attempt to pursue equal opportunity and diversity.
So do you think even, I hope we're not talking about this, but are we talking about clubs that are bringing in coaches that they know can't make the grade just so they can check that box?
No. I think the broader dynamic, Curtis, is that you have decision makers, owners of clubs, who are asking the question, who is it that I want for this position? Who do I want to hire?
Right.
And they answer that question and they make a hire. When that is not the question you want to ask. The question you want to ask is, who would be best for the job? And the answers to those two questions are often very, very different. And I think we have to get to a place where these decision makers, these owners, are asking the question, who would be best for the job? Then you have a broad search. You have a slow, deliberate search. You have a wide net cast. You have a broad pool of candidates. You make a pick. Whoever you pick is best situated to succeed. When you have a small group of candidates, when you don't really meaningfully consider the interviews of candidates of color, if you know who you want from the very beginning and you go and hire that person without really thinking about the others, then you are putting yourself at a competitive disadvantage. And I think some clubs are wrapped up in that dynamic right now.
Three of the top minority candidates names that circulate, the top one, Mr. Bieniemy, Eric Bieniemy, Todd Bowles, Byron Leftwich, all three of these coaches were on the sidelines in the Super Bowl. Their teams are in the Super Bowl, most notably Bieniemy, who is the offensive coordinator. I'm not telling you anything you don't know, for the highest powered offense of the past 2 seasons. Bowles, who has been a head coach, and Leftwich are considered less serious candidates, unfortunately, in most circles. Bieniemy, by all accounts, has paid his dues, right? It is simply a matter of, is it the fraternity or network that refuses to see candidates in these resumes?
I think it goes back to what I said before. Who owners want to hire. I think it goes back to a comfort level. You talk to a lot of Black candidates who have interviewed for head coaching and GM positions, and they'll say, at the end, I didn't get the job, and I asked why, and they said, hey, you were great, you did a fantastic job, but we're just more comfortable with this person. Which often that's code for something other than meritocracy, right? And so that's a big problem. And what concerns me about, you mentioned Bieniemy, he's, as you point out, he's extraordinary. The two offensive coordinators for the Chiefs before Bieniemy, working under Andy Reid, have gotten head coach jobs. Andy Reid will scream to the skies about how good Bieniemy is. Recommends him without reservation, but the guy just hasn't gotten the opportunity. And what I'm worried is going to happen is that one thing that you see in this context in the NFL is that you're hot for a while, and then it's viewed as though you're damaged goods because you haven't been able to get the job. And so my concern is going forward, and some people will probably use this Super Bowl and the fact that the offense didn't do what it normally does. I'm concerned that going forward, Bieniemy is going to fall down the list of hot candidates, and it's just not fair. It's just not fair. And so, I hope his window's not closed, but it may be closing.
Does it take Andy Reid to shake it up a little bit for him?
I tell you this: Andy Reid has done so much. He's made calls on his behalf. He's made it clear to the press. What Bieniemy does for the team, how he thinks Bieniemy should be a head coach. So I think Andy has done what he needs to do. I think at the end of the day, some club owners just don't want to. Eric Bieniemy is the face of the franchise.
So let me take a minute, and perhaps I should have started with this. Why this issue, Jeremy? What initially drew you to this matter, the Rooney Rule and the imbalance, quite honestly, with minority and gender equity in the NFL? Why did you make this your fight?
Well, it's interesting. I kind of fell into it, Curtis.
Okay.
So, but then I seized upon it because I felt it was deeply important. But, I trained as a civil rights lawyer. That's what I focused on in law school. I went to clerk for a judge after that out in Detroit, who was a civil rights judge. He passed away not too long ago. May he rest in peace. A tremendous mentor to me. His name is Judge Damon J. Keith. So I trained to be a civil rights lawyer. I went to a small civil rights law firm doing employment discrimination work. And when I got there, they were in the beginnings of talks with NFL coaches about this issue. This is almost 20 years ago, about this issue of lack of opportunity in the league to become a head coach. And I was asked to work on the matter. Okay. And so I did work on the matter, and it was a bit of a eureka moment for me. I realized that I could focus on this passion I have for civil rights,
Mm-hmm.
and also work in the sports industry, which I love. I mean, I don't know if listeners know this. You mentioned we're friends. We go back to junior high school.
Yeah, we do.
So as you know from junior high school, we both always loved sports. I've always loved sports. So to have the opportunity to mix those two things, to work at the nexus of civil rights and sports, was incredible for me. So once I got pulled into that matter, I decided that if I could, I'd spend the rest of my career doing what I can, to increase equal opportunity in sport.
So I'm going to get to that junior high sports in a minute, but why do I feel like, did I miss something? You were big on soccer too, weren't you?
Yeah. No, soccer was my sport. I still love soccer. I've been to a couple of World Cups, and those are some of my most treasured memories when it comes to sports memories. And I've done some work with soccer recently. There's an organization called SCORE, the Soccer Collective on Racial Equity, which is made up of former Major League Soccer players and U.S. internationals that are working to increase equal opportunity in terms of managing and coaching in Major League Soccer and in soccer more generally in this country. And I've done some work with them. But most of my work has been with the NFL. And I think part of that is just because, as I indicated, I kind of fell into that.
Right.
That's where the opportunity was.
So a quick look at your bio and resume certainly highlight your work in those areas, minority hirings in the NFL and college football as well. But if you peel back that layer, there's a ton more work you've done. You just mentioned SCORE. In your current position as professor at American University, you've written on matters such as safety in youth sports, head injuries, be it soccer, the current pandemic and youth sports returning to play. Please expand. You mentioned SCORE, but I want you to take that a little bit further. You're not just, the drum major for, black hires in the NFL. Where else are where are you casting that line?
Sure. Thanks, Curtis. I appreciate all the kind things you're saying about me, by the way. I don't know that I deserve all of them.
Well, I'm going to get you in the end. Don't worry. I got something for you in the end.
I appreciate it. So I view myself as somebody who works in sport and society, and kind of the sport and society community views itself as folks who think about the ways in which sport impacts society and can impact society, and the way society impacts sport. Nelson Mandela said something like, sport is the most powerful uniter in the world. And he wasn't talking about any particular type of bridge that was being crossed, but as a general matter, sport has the ability to bring people together. And so I feel like it's incumbent upon us, those of us who are interested in sport, those of us who love sport, to figure out ways to work for the positive through sport. And so we've talked about the work that I've done in the NFL context and with SCORE, but outside of race, I've studied gender in sport, gender inequity in basketball in particular. You mentioned the concussion piece. I basically argue, and I love soccer, and there may be some listeners who love soccer, and they may skewer me for this, but I argue in that piece that heading should be eliminated from soccer altogether.
I've seen that piece. Yeah, I've seen.
Yeah. I mean, one, there are the concussions that happen in soccer from head-to-head blows and elbow-to-head blows and head-to-goalpost blows and head-to-ground blows coming down off a header. But also the number of subconcussive blows you get from actually heading the ball, a lot of studies are indicating can be just as damaging as concussions. And when the game was first originated, Curtis, there was no heading. The ball was at a heavy leather orb. You couldn't really get it off the ground. And so, there is a world in which soccer could be played without heading. And I think that would be safer for us all. So it's a minority position, but I feel pretty strongly about it.
And I don't want to let us get too far away from the NFL conversation without talking about, we're also looking at disparity in the front office as well.
Yes.
We're not just looking at, head coaching positions. We're looking at GMs and presidents. The Washington football team, 90 days ago didn't have anyone in their front office. And now they've got, 2 GMs and 1 former president in the front office. And they do have, I believe, the only GM of color. Is that correct?
They have the only they have the only black president in the league.
Okay. So, I don't know if we can touch on that without saying, There's some other issues in Ashburn as well and in Landover. But, where do you feel like the league is with those positions, those front office positions?
Yeah, so league struggles in those positions without question. And you're right. The Washington Football Club, as of late, has done a really good job with this. I think in that
most smoke and mirrors, because we have some other things going on over here.
That's what I was about to say. That's what I was about to say.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so the last few months they've made some progressive moves, but it's on the heels of several years of I think by any reasonable estimation, substantial dysfunction in all sorts of regard. I think, this, with respect to race, with respect to gender, with respect to the name they had for so long that is itself a racial pejorative. And so they are doing better now. I think a lot of it does have to do with Jason Wright and this new administration. I applaud them for that. They had further to go than many other clubs, but they seem to be making some good calls now. With respect to the league more generally, there are two presidents of color in the league, one black president. The GMs, there are 5 GMs in the league, 5 black GMs in the league. Before this hiring season, they were 2, so there's been a substantial increase there. But still, the numbers are deeply disproportionate.
32 teams, right?
32 teams, right. But I think the key thing is there's no black owner of a club. Right. There's a Pakistani-American owner down in Jacksonville. But other than that, there's not an owner of color in the league. Excuse me. Buffalo Bills is co-owned. That club is co-owned by a woman of color. But outside of those clubs, there's not a owner of color in the league. So there are a lot of realms in which there needs to be more thought given to diversity. We hear about head coaching most because you see those folks on the sidelines every Sunday, but the league's got a lot of work to do in a lot of different respects.
And so we look at other sports. We look at college football. There's, we're not advancing the ball there, but you look at, I saw your interview with Chuck Todd. Great interview. Loved it.
Thank you.
Of course, I didn't feel like my man Jeremy got enough FaceTime on that, but we're trying to bring these subjects to the forefront. And I heard something in that interview where, on the college ranks, you have your administration, you have your athletics department, you have your, athletic directors, you have your supporters, you have your alum. And are we talking about, and I don't recall what the answer was or how you guys developed, support around that, but are we talking about an alum? Are we talking about a network of people who want to see coaches on their football sidelines that look like them?
So I think that's a great question. I think at the end of the day, stakeholders are the ones that are important to decision makers when they make decisions. Decision makers make decisions with stakeholders, make decisions with stakeholders in mind. And so if you are a stakeholder and you desire a certain outcome, then you make yourself heard. A group of alums, a group of, in the professional ranks, fans, if great enough in number and working concertedly, can have that sort of impact, particularly if they're wielding dollars. Going back to the Washington football team situation, that you may, we grew up around here. I mean, you've been reading the papers here. You may remember when the owner of the club said, and I quote, "I will never change this name." Capital, and he said, you can write. It was a USA Today interview, I think. He said, "You can write this down in caps in the article. NEVER. I will never change the name."
Right.
And I think he would never have changed the name. But this extraordinary social uprising in this country, which happened in 2020, began, and you had sponsors, including FedEx, the namesake of the field, saying we have to rethink this name situation.
Right.
And within a couple of weeks, the name changes.
Right.
All right. That is pressure being brought to bear. And so I think, not everybody is the owner of a FedEx, but if you have a voice and you have a collective voice with others who share your view, you express that voice. And unlike, the old days where there's really no way to get a platform unless you were on one of 3 television networks, everybody can create their own platform and come together, through social media. So everybody's got a role to play in this. If we want greater diversity, greater equal opportunity in sport, then everybody has to step up and say so.
And I think it goes back to, and who knows if this will ever change, but he who holds the purse strings, right? Those alum collectively, as you said, have that voice and they hold purse strings. Well, we end up with what I have on the cover of one of my photo albums, a young man last summer holding a sign that says, "I wished America loved me like they did when I was a Division I athlete." Right? That's
I'll tell you what, I mean, we could spend 3 hours talking about the commodification of the athlete and the commodification of the Black athlete.
And I've Jeremy, we spent, and now we're off script now, just so you know.
There we go.
I spent a lot of time, Jeremy, with status quo being okay with me. I didn't want to go too far to the right. I didn't want to go too far to the left. I just want to stay in my lane. But, I've realized last year, I realized especially that status quo is not good enough. It's simply not good enough to just march in your lane, do what you do. That didn't affect me. That didn't affect me, and what have you. So I've spent some time thinking about the commodification, as you said, of the NCAA athlete. And my stance was always, you got the scholarship, you knew what you were getting into. But then you take a look and you see that someone, like a running back, a quarterback, a wide receiver, or whoever, that plays for Alabama or Tennessee, or, the basketball, the point guard, and we're not talking just color, where they're selling so many jerseys of this kid's name. And Jeremy, I'll tell you right now, if you and I were to take in a Georgetown versus, I don't know, St. John's game, we're not there to see Pat Ewing coach. We're there to see the players. Right? When you go to the NFL, no one's there to see Dan Snyder. No one's there to see, these owners. We're there to see the players. And they are the commodity. Because I'll tell you what, if Dan Snyder gets on the field, I don't want to see that game. So, obviously there's a different concept in the professional ranks. But, these players are making, I can't say millions. I better put a B on it. It's billions, right? Across college sports, be it swim and dive, be it gymnastics, be it, the money makers were football and basketball. But, that's a conversation to be had. And we're seeing some movement on that. Am I right?
Yeah. So, the money is huge. And you're right, Curtis. Your analysis is right. These athletes are not getting paid themselves, but they're getting the scholarship indeed. With their scholarship athletes, but they are making millions and millions and billions of dollars for the industry. Individual coaches, the top individual coaches in men's basketball and football are making almost $10 million a year. The commissioners of conferences making huge money. ADs making huge money. The NCAA. A century ago, it truly was amateur, and nobody was making money. Right. And a century later, now a lot of people are making money. It is a business, but the players alone in that business are deemed amateurs. And so certainly it's a disturbing and troubling dynamic. It's, very few people would suggest that there isn't some concern there. You're right. There is some movement. There was pressure brought to bear by legislators in California a year or so ago. And they said, they basically passed legislation that said that the NCAA could not prevent student athletes in that state from selling their name, image, and likeness. So doing an endorsement for Gatorade or Nike or whatever. And they passed it. It didn't come into effect yet. And then other states followed on. So now you've got a number of states who have similar legislation. There's a movement for federal legislation to the same effect. And seeing all this, the NCAA came in and said, all right, let us put together a plan for student athletes to benefit from the name, image, and likeness. So right now we're in the process of the construction of those plans, and we'll see ultimately, how they come out. But I don't, there's nobody really left who can say with intellectual honesty that there's really nothing that needs to be done for these college athletes with respect to their right to make money off of the name, image, and likeness. The bigger question, the next question, is whether name, image, and likeness rights will be enough to satisfy those who are concerned about student athlete civil rights and human rights. There are arguments that student athletes should be viewed as employees, which would come with Fair Labor Standards Act protection, which is minimum wage and overtime. It would come with the ability to unionize, all sorts of things. So this is, I think the name, image, and likeness exploration is kind of the tip of the iceberg of what we may see when it comes to the battle for student athlete human rights.
And I don't want to forget, you mentioned all of the ways that NCAA makes money. And obviously, there's an ESPN contract, there's a CBS Sports Network contract. There are bowl games where we're talking millions of dollars. And, obviously during the pandemic, that kind of changed a little bit. But you also see these sports who are doing everything they can to do something safely, because there's a lot of money in bowl games. There's a lot of money in the Big Ten and March Madness. We're talking about quarantining everyone and having all games in Indiana, I think, for March Madness, because the NCAA wants to protect that investment, that very investment that can't earn a dollar off of all the dollars that they're making. And, Baylor's women's coach, I can't say her name right now, but I did a piece on her where she's saying it's all about the money. We're at risk. Some of us are at risk, these protocols. I talked to you about some of the work I do and how we've been unable really to get that ball moving because of protocol. And by the way, you're a sneaky fella. I see advancing the ball right behind you over your shoulder. I didn't.
Yeah, they told me I should keep that up there.
Yeah, absolutely.
While you're talking about it, Curtis, the book next to it is The Business of Sports Agents. That's a book I co-wrote with the professor at Arizona State University and went to Wake Forest. And so that's another potential book to add to the reading list.
Okay, well, then I will. I added Advancing the Ball. I believe it was August of 2010 or 11. When was
11.
that? 11. Okay, so we are 10 years in. Jeremy, before we finish all of this up, I want to turn the attention away from athletics. We all had to have conversations in our home last summer. What were those conversations like for you? What you care to share? You have some sons. What were those conversations like for you? I've had plenty of conversations myself, and the conversation you and I have to have is not the same conversation that our white counterparts have to have with their sons. What was that like for you? Were you doing it for the first time last summer?
Oh man, this is tough stuff, Curtis, as you know. No, it was not the first time we talked about it. I've got a 17-year-old, a 14-year-old, and a 7-year-old. The 7-year-old, we've not talked about it with him, but with everything that's been on the news and he's begun to get a sense of it earlier in life than we'd like. But this is life. But the 17-year-old, the 14-year-old, I started talking to each of them when they were 12, 13. As soon as they were looking anything close to like a man, I wanted them to hear about this. And so we talked about it, the danger that just exists in existing as a Black man.
Right.
And as we've learned, of course, not just as a Black man, but as a Black woman. I've got 3 sons, so my conversations have been about being a Black man. But you have a daughter, and so I know that conversation will be one that you have. It was a difficult and fraught time for us. I will say that I took my boys. My oldest boy wanted to go and protest outside of the White House in that first weekend after the country began to explode. And I was in my father mode, and I was a little worried because it wasn't clear what, remember those, I didn't want my son to be in danger.
Right.
And he and I, he was respectful, but he got into it. He's like, Daddy, we have to do this. We have to go down. And it was one of the first times where, it was a seminal moment for me, because I was like, yeah, you're right, son. I'm not right. You're right. We do have to go down.
Right.
And so I took him and his younger brother downtown, and we walked with, hundreds of thousands of others protesting the systemic discrimination and police brutality that we see in this country. And it was a very meaningful moment for us.
Jeremy, I'm not going to get into the complete story, but you just reminded me of, for those who don't know or who haven't listened all the way to the end, there's a young lady that I thank at the end of my podcast, and her name is Khadijah. And I thank her because her and I had that moment last summer that you had with your son, where we're able to learn from these young people. These young people have a voice. When we were younger, we were crazy and this, that, and the other, and our parents didn't like our music or whatever, and now we're at the point where we're thinking, we're the adults and, these young people, I don't care for the music, this, that, and the other, but these young people have opportunities and they have a voice that you and I did not have. That voice is amplified by social media. And like you said, there are no longer just 3 networks where you can get your point across. You can build your platform. And I had to, and I'll probably tell you offline because I'm not ready to tell the entire story yet, but I got to learn from a young lady who I did not know prior. And we can learn from these young people. They have something to say. Not all of them are full of it. We can learn from these young people. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So last summer was interesting. It was crazy. For those who don't know, my wife is white. Her and I had to have some very sobering conversations where, she had to tussle with the privilege that she did not know she had, that she wakes up with every day. I introduced the concept of, I had to tell my son, it's so important for me for my son, more so than my daughter. It's so important that my son sees Madam Vice President Kamala Devi Harris, because my daughter will know that struggle all too soon. I think we as men, we must recognize that, because I think that's some of where the imbalance comes in. And I think it falls on our shoulders to educate and be educated about how this, gender equality can take a bigger effect. Anyway, we'll talk about that offline, because I definitely want to get your thoughts on that. Jeremi, there are a few things I'd like to add. I'll never forget our year together at Tacoma Park Middle School. And with you just a year younger than me, I was hot stuff. You're younger than me, so I was hot stuff. But on the basketball court, you and I were there, and you absolutely schooled me, Jeremi, and you weren't supposed to do that as a younger man. I thought, I'm 8th grade, you're 7th grade. I'm going to beat this guy, but you showed me a different way, and I never got on a soccer field with you because I played fullback, Jeremi. That means if the ball got that far, get it out of there. I wasn't a dribbler. I wasn't a midfielder. I imagine you played forward or midfielder, right?
I played some fullback. I also played some midfield. But
no, you didn't play fullback. Fullback was for the big guys like me who couldn't get up and down the field.
No, man. I was the type of back. I was a sweeper. I'd bring the ball down on my chest and play it forward and start the attack. So I was a finesse.
Here you go. When I played back in the 70s, even though I'm not that much older, there were no sweepers. It was fullback, midfielder, forward. That was it. You got sweepers, attackers. It's a different game now. I'll also take this moment to thank you for what you did several years ago. It must have been around the time of Advancing the Ball was released. You took the time to come to one of the games I was coaching. For those who don't know, I coached women's high school and college basketball in my day. Honestly, you weren't otherwise vested in the game, but I invited you. You came to check out. JV girls basketball, which it was at the time, is always a tough sell. So, I can't remember why you came by, but you showed up. And I appreciate that. So thanks for supporting that effort.
Yeah, you're welcome. I showed up to see you, man. I showed up to see you and catch up with you and support you. It's you mentioned Montgomery Blair Blazers earlier, and it's a small kind of cohort of us, but it's a strong. I'm so proud. You look back at all the folks from our generation of Blair.
Oh my goodness!
All the things we've done. I just get so proud, and I've always felt that way. And so. Anytime I can support, one of my fam, really, from the Blair Tacoma days, I do that. So I was more than happy to come out and support you, and then you supported me. I'll share with your listeners. I was about to get married, and I was struggling to find somebody to do a wedding CD that would be a giveaway at my wedding, and we were short on time, and I needed something done quickly, and I was worried and. Like, oh man, Kurtis might be able to do it. I didn't even know if you do that. I just knew that you had your extraordinary DJ business, and not only did you do it, it was fantastic. I still have the CD.
My man.
Yeah. So I appreciate that, and I appreciate you having me on the show, and it's given us a chance to talk about some important things, but also just to catch up. I'm thankful for that.
You know what? It's fascinating. It's ironic you would mention the CD because we have a couple studios now. We had a studio then with a big CD duplicator, and recently my in-laws have come into town to visit for a few months, and I would be willing to bet you that my mother-in-law may have been a part of duplicating those CDs, because I picture her in front of that machine, sticking the CDs in, waiting 2 minutes, they come back out and doing it. Jeremy, I did want to touch on one other thing. Where's hockey going wrong? Because NASCAR has me as a fan. The NBA, the NFL, Major League Baseball has me as a fan. My wife is an NHL fan, Buffalo Sabres fan. She's from Western New York. She's no longer interested. Where's the NHL missing on? I think it's more in their platforms, their promotions. You look at the NFL, the NBA, and the MLB, they're doing their part to usher in different races, different genders to watch their sport. I've seen NASCAR for years. I've gone to NASCAR and I've seen the face of the fans change over the years. Why are we not seeing the face of fans change in the NHL?
Well, it's a good question. I'm probably not the best suited to answer it, because I actually am a Capitals fan.
All right.
And I don't know if I'm an NHL fan. That's to say, I've not studied the league. But I am a Capitals fan from the old days when
Rob
you had
Langway.
Mike Gardner and Ben Gustafson and
you got Rob Langway.
I don't know if any of your listeners are going to know these names.
Right.
But and I went to a couple of games recently, and there actually was decent diversity there.
Okay.
And the song that they played when the puck was dropped was "Welcome to DC," that go-go tune.
Right.
And I sat there and I was like, man, these guys are actually doing it right. So I can't speak to the league as a general matter, although they do have a new diversity officer named Kim Davis, a Black woman who's doing good things. But I can say that I've always felt, or as of late, I have felt comfortable watching Capitals games. I think there's been a relatively diverse fan base there, at least in the stadium. And it helped a lot when Joel Ward, who's now retired, but he was a Black player, played with the Caps and had some good years about 7-8 years ago. So I actually am a Caps fan, man. I'm a Caps fan.
You know what? Then what you've just done is maybe I'm stuck 5 to 10 years ago, and maybe it's time to give it another shot. Because what I remember is, hairband 80s metal music being played all the time, and they're not being a seemingly intentional outreach to bring in different kinds of fans. So, Jeremy, based on your word, I will give it a shot. Jeremy, thanks for joining me at the virtual table and adding to this conversation. As you know, this is important work in an industry changing socially. It's it goes a good bit further than simply minority coaches or front office personnel in the NFL. I believe you've been able to lean into this subject matter as it applies far more globally than just in one sport, from NASCAR to youth sports to college football. I saw something you wrote about Bubba Wallace, and beyond. You've really made this effort more than about one book 10 years ago. Please tell our audience how they can connect with you. Please plug your books. Talk about Professor Jeremi Duru. How do they find you? How can they engage with what you're doing?
Okay, thanks. And thanks again for having me, Curtis. So my books, you can find them on, wherever books are sold, which these days tends to be Amazon and other online retailers. But Advancing the Ball, you mentioned, The Business of Sports Agents. Sports Law and Regulation is more of a case book. If you're in law school, that's a book that you may end up using for a class. But I think all of those books have something to offer. If you want to engage, first of all, I love to talk to I love talking about this stuff. I'm one of the few people, I guess, maybe there are others, but I feel very fortunate that my pleasure reading is also my work reading. Basically, my work, so I'd love to engage in these conversations with anybody at any time. Maybe best is Twitter, at Jeremi Duru, Twitter, and just hit me up. I'll get back to you and we can start a conversation. But even if it's not with me, I encourage your listeners to have this conversation, to think about sports and think about what sports can do to push our society forward. And again, Curtis, a real pleasure to be with you. Thanks for having me on.
Jeremy, I'm going to ask you to return backstage. I'm going to check you in a minute. I definitely want to, I need to tell you the rest of that story.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for listening and watching Conversations with Curtis. I can't thank Professor Jeremi Duru enough for joining me today. I encourage each of you to continue this conversation with me on social media at Kurtis Talks. That's Kurtis with a K. And of course, you can go to the website, www.kurtistalks.com, and connect with me that way as well. As you are hearing this episode, our entire catalog of podcasts is available across 15 podcast platforms and of course on YouTube. Thanks to our sponsors, A Squared, Home and Office Solutions, and Gene the Barber. And as always, thank you, Khadijah. We'll see you next time.
Crosstalk, Conversations with Kurtis can be heard on iHeartRadio, Spotify, Apple Music, and just about anywhere podcasts can be found.
You know, there are few relationships more solid than the bond between a man and his barber. For years, I've gotten my cut with Gene the Barber. Gene has been cutting my hair for more than 20 years. Call him directly at 240-687-7253 and make an appointment. Gene the Barber, 240-687-7253.
A Squared Home and Office Solutions is the go-to source for home or office network and audiovisual solutions. We can help with smart home integration, wireless networking, media rooms, security systems, and more. We will link technology to your lifestyle seamlessly. Visit homeandofficesolutions.com for more info.